Welcome to Latin 2. Hope you had a great summer. This is going to be a fairly quick and concise review of last year's Latin 1 class that you had. We covered about chapters 1 through 14 in Wheelock's Latin text, and we're going to do a quick review of those 14 different chapters. Y'all started off with verbs, and y'all learned a lot about verbs. So let's look at this. You learned about the 5 characteristics of verbs, which included voice, which is determines if the subject is either doing or receiving the action. You learned about mood, which is the manner of the action. Tense, the time of the action. Person, this is the one who is performing the action according to the point of view of the speaker. And of course you learned about number, which is the quantity of those doing the action. In practical terms, that looks like voice, active and passive. Mood, which is indicative, imperative, and subjunctive, which you haven't learned yet, and we'll learn that later this next year. That's basically statements, commands, and potential action. You learned 6 different tenses: present, imperfect, future, perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect. Person, first, second, and third, which is I and we, you and you all, he, she, and it, and they. And of course, number, which is singular and plural. Those are the 5 characteristics of verb. Every verb has these characteristics, and you learned all of these characteristics last year. The one exception would be subjunctive, and again, you'll learn that second semester, so we won't talk about that right now. So mood, just as a reminder what mood is, it's indicative. Mood is the pointing out. It's a statement. It's a pointing out action that's happening or not happening. And imperative, of course, is your commands. Subjunctive is something, again, we'll learn next semester, so don't worry about it. In Latin, of course, every verb, or almost all verbs, have what we call 4 principal parts. These are the main, or the 4 main verb forms from which all other forms come. Principal parts. This is the 4 main verb forms from which all verbs come. And we learned basically 4 or 5 different conjugations that all look slightly different. First conjugation, our paradigm verb, in other words, the verb that helps set the pattern for us. We looked at laudo, laudare, laudavi, laudatum. So all first conjugation verbs basically look like that form. They have that long A in the second principal part, laudare, A, long A. Second conjugation, monao, moneri, monui, monatum. Again, long E in that second principal part. Third conjugation verbs, if you remember last year, they're a little different. They act third, fourth, and third IO act a little differently than first and second. We'll look at that more in a minute. But they all have that short E in the second principal part. So it's ago, ageri, egi, actum. Short E in the second principal part. Fourth conjugation, audeo, audiri, audiwi, auditum. Long I in the second principal part, audiri. And then third IO conjugation. I always say that it looks like third conjugation and fourth conjugation got together and had a child, because it's kind of a merging of both of those 2 conjugations. But kapao, kaperi, kepi, kaptum is our paradigm verb. And again, it's got a short E, just like regular third conjugation in the second principal part. So these are the paradigms that we learn for all of the conjugations. From here, we talked about infinitives. And of course, infinitive is pretty simple. It's just the second principal part. So laudari, moneri, ageri, audiri, caperi. Those are the infinitives. And you recognize an infinitive because it has that RE at the end. That RE is the telltale sign of an infinitive. And of course, infinitive, you translate it as you've learned: to praise, to warn, to lead, to hear, to take. The reason why it's called an infinitive is because it has no limitations. A verb that has an ending on it, like ost, mustisnt, it's limited or finite. It is I who am praising, or you are praising, or he is praising. It's limited to that person. But an infinitive is not limited. It's unlimited. It's in an infinitive. It's infinite. And so therefore, you just say to praise. We're not limiting who's praising, I, you, or he. It's just praise, to praise. So that's why it's called an infinitive. But you've learned this in English: to praise, to warn, to lead, to hear, to take. And that is our infinitives. And that was a pretty easy lesson that you learned. Let's see. Here's our different categories or conjugations. We already looked at that just a second ago: laudari, moneri, ageri, audiri, and caperi. All right. And it is important to learn the stems for each of these. You have to know that first conjugation has a long A, second conjugation a long E, third conjugation a short E, fourth conjugation a long I, and again a third IO, like cape has a short E. And you can see the stem, and then there's the stem vowel for lauda, monet, age, ade, and cape. There's the vowels A, E, E, I, and E. Stem vowel. Those two go hand in hand, but you got to keep those, get those memorized. And it's to these stems with the stem vowel that we add all our endings, and that's how we conjugate. So to form those endings those stems, you just drop the infinitive ending, drop that re, and that's your stem. Okay. We also learned about imperatives, which again is a command, right? And that's pretty simple lesson that you learned last year. You take the infinitive. In this case, we got ladari and moneri, and there's your infinitive ending, right? The re. And you just drop that off. And that gives you your imperative. Lauda, monet, praise, warn. It's a command, but it's a command to one person. Now, what if you wanted to command more than one person? You just add a te to the end of that. So it's laudate, monete. Just add that te, and that becomes you all praise, you all warn. Anytime you're trying to get somebody, commanding somebody more than one person to do the action of the verb. So lauda, laudate, monet, monete, that's your imperatives. Pretty simple lesson, right? And you spent some time on that last year. Then you learned how to conjugate. So let's look at this here. By the way, anytime you need to take a break, just take a break and come back to it. This is a lesson that probably takes about 20 minutes or so. So if you need to take a break, feel free to take a break and just come on back. So to conjugate verbs, you have to make sure you know the principal parts, right? So again, here are all of our principal parts. And what the key principal part for conjugating a verb comes from the second principal part, or the infinitive. And it's from there that we conjugate in the present system, which, if you'll remember, the present system is present tense, imperfect tense, and future tense. So you've got to know those infinitives, because you drop that infinitive ending, re, and that gives you your stem, which we just looked at in the last slide there. So let's move forward here. And perfect system also, that comes from the third principal part. You did learn that last year. Perfect system comes from the third principal part. And again, you just drop that I ending off, and that gives you the stem for conjugating in the perfect tense. So in this case, ladav, or of course we don't say the V, it's a W sound, so it's ladaw, ladawi. And that's your stem, ladaw. Monu, egg, adiv, kep. That's your stem. Drop that I ending, and then you can conjugate in every tense in the perfect system. So let's see what that looks like. This is your active voice, because you haven't learned passive yet. We're coming to that soon. But active voice, this is your present and perfect systems. So here's an example of laudo, laudari, laudawi, laudatum in the present, imperfect, future, and then of course the perfect, pluperfect, future perfect. So notice lado, ladas, ladat, ladamus, ladatus, ladant, ladabam, ladabas, ladabat, ladabamus, ladabatus, ladabant, ladabo, ladabis, ladabit, ladabimus, ladabitus, ladabunt. So in every one of those, you took the second principal part, ladari, dropped the re, that gave you lada. Into that lada, you added all your endings. Ost mustasint, bombaspat, bombaspatisbant, bobisbit, bimisbitisbunt. Hopefully this is all coming back to mind and you're like, oh yeah, I remember all that. Now the perfect system, you took the ladawi, that third principal part, and you dropped that I, and that gave you ladav, or again, better pronunciation was ladaw. And to that, you add your perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect endings. E is the it, imus istis erunt. Aramarasarat, aramasaratis arant. Arorisarit, arimus aritis arent. So that gave you ladawi, ladawisti, ladawit, ladawimus, ladawistis, ladawarunt. Ladawaram, ladawaras, ladawarat, ladawaramus, ladawaratus, ladawarant, ladawaro, ladawaris, ladawarit, ladawarimus, ladawaritis, ladawarent. So that's how you conjugate in the active voice, present, and perfect system. Now, the next couple of slides basically are the exact same thing for the second, third, fourth, and third IO conjugations. I'm not going to go over them, but it's the exact same process for first and second conjugation. So I won't go over that one, but you can see Mona O there in all of the 6 tenses. Now, I do need to go over this one just a tad bit with you here, because if you remember, this one gives people a little bit of trouble, and so you may need to spend some time reviewing this. But if you'll notice that second principal part, agere, you drop the RE, and that gives you your stem, AGE, but it's not uniform throughout the conjugation. If you remember, that short E in some places shifts to an I. So if you look in present tense, you can see it's a go and then a gis with an I. A go, a gis, a get, a gimus, a gittis, a gunt. And then in third person plural, it's even a U. So you do have your OST, mustus, unt endings, but your vowel is kind of all over the place. Short I, short I, short I, short I, and then a short U. But you might have been expecting an E, a short E, because of your stem, agere. But that's just something you have to, hopefully you have memorized. A go, a gis, a get, a gimus, a gittis, a gunt. But that's important because fourth and third IO verbs look a lot like this, so you need to get that down. And then in the imperfect, it's the E. It shifts to a long E, but there is an E all the way across here, and you add your bombas bot, bombas bot, this bont. So therefore, that gives you your agabam, agabas, agabat, agabamus, agabatis, agabant. But that one's pretty standard. That's pretty easy to remember. That E stays there. Now, future is the big problem. Present tense was a little bothersome because that E shifts to an I. But here, future is even more complicated. It's not terrible, but you just have to make sure you remember you don't use your normal future endings like you learned previously. You don't use bo, bis, bit, bimus, bitis, bunt. You actually are using your present tense endings. And to the present tense endings, you use your AGE stem, except in the first person, singular, future tense, and it's an A. And if you'll remember, you learned your OST mustiscent, that first person singular is an O most of the times, but occasionally an M, and here it is an M. So you have this sort of weird looking form that you're not expecting for future. You would expect it to be something like agabo, but it's really agam. And then it shifts back to the E all the way down. So agam, a guess, a get, a gemus, a getis, a gent. So that's the big thing that a lot of students get tripped up on, and you just have to remember if this is a third conjugation, a fourth conjugation, or a third IO verb, the future tense does not use bo, bis, bit. It uses your present tense endings, OST, mustus, int, and the first person singular is actually an M, and it has an A connecting vowel. So that's something you got to work on. If you have trouble with this, I would encourage you over the weekend to work on this and get this down. Perfect system is normal, like you'd expect. Third principal part, eggy, drop the I, and your stem is egg. And to egg, you add your ending. So you end up with eggy, egisti, egit, egimus, egistis, egarunt, egaram, egaras, egarat, egaramus, egaratus, egarant. Future tense, egaro, egaris, egarit, egarimus, egaritus, egarent. So perfect system's easy. It's this present system in third that is a little bit hard. So work on that. Let's see what fourth conjugation looks like. Again, fourth conjugation has that long I. Look at the second principal part, audiri. Drop the infinitive ending, the RE. That gives you audi, A-U-D-I, as your stem. And if you look at present tense, it's all the way through. Audio, audis, audit, audimus, auditis, audiunt. So you do have that U in there, but you've added that I. Remember, it was a gunt in the last slide, the third conjugation, a gunt with a U-N-T. Here it's audiunt. That I actually comes before here, and that U stays in. So that one's pretty consistent. You just have to remember third person plural has an I and a U. And then in the imperfect, it's an I and an E. So bombas bot this bont, but it's audi bom, audi bas, audia bot, audia bamus, audia batis, audia bont. So you got to remember you've got a double vowel going on there. You can't forget that for fourth conjugation. And then again, the future, just like that last conjugation, third conjugation, we're not using bo, bis, bit. We use the present tense endings. And remember how first person singular future has an A, audiam. Well, it was agam. It had an A. Well, now you have it here in future fourth conjugation, audiam, audiam. And then the rest have the present tense, but again, an I and an E all the way down. So audiam, audies, audiet, audiemus, audietis, audient. So that's how you did future. Again, you're going to have to work on third and fourth. And then I won't go over the perfect system because it's the exact same thing that you expect. Third principal part, audiwi, drop the I, audiv is your stem, and you add all of your perfect system endings. So that one's pretty consistent. And then this brings us finally to third IO, which is, if you remember, I said third IO is like fourth conjugation and third conjugation got together and had a child, and they had offspring, and it kind of favors fourth conjugation. It kind of leans that direction, but it definitely has some things you go, oh yeah, that's third conjugation characteristic. So let's look at this. Capere is your second principal part. Drop the infinitive RE ending, and that leaves you with cape with a short E. But remember how ago, that E shifted to an I? Well, you see it here. Capio, then capis, capit, capimus, capitis, but capium. Remember how third conjugation was agunt with just a U, but fourth conjugation was audiunt. Well, here, this is where you see that fourth conjugation leans towards looking like its parent fourth conjugation, and it's got an IU, capiunt. And then imperfect, again, you have the IE, so it's capiabam, capiabas, capiabat, capiabamus, capiabatis, capiabant. And then in your future, again, your present tense endings with an IA and then an IE all the way down. Capiam, capies, capiet, capiamus, capietis, capient. So you got to work on third, fourth, and third IO, especially in the future tense. It's going to require a little bit of work. Hopefully you've got this down already, but go back and practice it. Perfect system, again, third principal part, kepi, drop the I, so kep is your stem, and to that you add all of your perfect system endings. So that is your conjugating. You should have learned that pretty well last year. We also talked about the idea that on a test specifically, I want to ask you to conjugate a verb in all of these different tenses because there's so many of them, but we may ask you to give a synopsis. And a synopsis means you take one particular part. Let me go back to that last slide here. So for instance, if I said, hey, I want you to do a synopsis of the word kapao, and I want you to give me all of its forms in the active voice, second person singular. That means you would give me, if you look at second person singular, you would give me capis, capiabas, capies, capisti, keparas, keparis. So you would just give me those 6 forms rather than give me all of, 36 forms. That's a lot easier to do, a lot quicker to do, but it shows me you know how to form these. If I asked you to give me a first person plural synopsis, you would give me capimus, capiabamus, capiemus, kepimus, keparamus, keparimus. So that's essentially what this synopsis is. I ask you to give me one specific one. You give me that specific form. There's the example for first plural, and then below that I give you the example of third person singular. La dot, la dabat, la dabit, la dawit, la dawarat, la dawarit. So you learned how to do synopsis last year. Again, if you want to take a break, this is a good time to do it. If not, you can keep going. If you take a break, this is where you start back. You looked at the irregular verbs sum and possum last year. Here are the conjugations. Hopefully you got these down. Sum ess, sum assest sunt, which is I am, you are, he is, we are, you are, they are. That's present tense. The irregular verb in the imperfect is arama rasarat, arama sarata sarant. And then future tense was aro, aris, arit, arimus, aritis, arunt. Of course, you can see the translations, I was, or in future tense, I will be. So you learned that last year. You also learned the irregular verb possum, which is basically this verb, but you add either a POS or a POT in front of it. And that gives you a whole new verb. So notice possum, potest, potest, possumus, potestis, possunt. And that's I am able. It's not just I am, it's I am able or I can. You are able, he is able, we are able, you are able, they are able. Notice that some of them have a POS in front of the sumes test. Some of them have a POT. And the way I usually teach my students is this little phrase that if it begins with an S, you need to add a POS. If it begins with a T, excuse me, if it begins with an E, you better add a POT. And so it's possum. Sum starts with an S, so it's POS. And then possumus starts with an S. Excuse me, sumus starts with an S, so you add a POS. Possunt, sunt begins with an S, so you add a POS. The rest of them all begin with an E. S, est, estis, so you add a POT. So if it begins with an E, add a T. All right? That's the way you remember it. Now for the rest of these in the imperfect and future, you just take those imperfect verbs, excuse me, the irregular verbs, aramarasarat, aramarasarat, aroarisarit, aremasaritis, and you add a POT in front of all of them. And that gives you I was able, you were able, etc. Or in the future, potero, I will be able, you will be able, etc. So those are the irregular verbs. Hopefully you've got those. If you need to practice them, please go ahead. And we've already talked about infinitives, but then we talked about complementary infinitives, which means they are infinitives that are used to help finish a thought. Some verbs require a complementary infinitive to complete the thought. Verbs like possum, debao, and audao. If you just say I am, possum, or excuse me, I am able, or debao, you ought, I ought, audao, I dare, they don't really say anything. You really need to add something. In this case, a complementary infinitive to complete the ending. And there's two quick examples. Rex potest superare Romam. The king, Rex, is able, potest, superare, to conquer Rome. The king is able to conquer Rome. The main verb is potest, but the superare is a complementary infinitive. Another example here, debes conserrari pecuniam tuam. You ought to save your money. Conserrari is the complementary infinitive. So if you need to practice that, please go ahead. If you want to take a break, now's a good time. Got a couple more minutes left. We're going to look at nouns next. Welcome back. So let's review some nouns. You learned a couple of different declensions last year. You learned first and second declension, which looks like this. Here are your endings for first declension. I, and then vocative is Now, we don't usually say that in the chant, but I went ahead and put it here on the chart so that you can see it. Vocative is an A. And then plural I, arum, is, as, is, I. Second declension, which is often masculine but has some neuter. Masculine is usiomo, e, orum, is, os, is, e. Second declension, neuter, umiomo, a, orum, isa, is, a. And just to throw it specifically in examples of words that are declined, you've got aqua, aquai, aquai, etc. Those are all first declension. That's aqua, declined first declension. Amicus, which is a second declension masculine. Amicus, amici, etc. And then second neuter, the word bellum or war. Bellum, belly, bellow. So you can see that example there. Give that a look over. If anything doesn't look familiar, go back and work on that some. If you have questions, of course, you can ask in class. But we won't always have vocative on these charts. Matter of fact, because vocative is exactly, generally speaking, exactly like the nominative, it's dropped off, and it basically just looks like this. Okay? All right, third declension. Here's your review. Third declension has masculine, feminine, and neuter forms. Your masculine and feminine endings are the same. You can see on the far left of that chart there, blank, is, e, m, e, blank for vocative, s, ibis, s, ibis, s for vocative plural. And we have two examples, the masculine rex, rex, regis, regi, regem, rege, rex, reges, regum, regibus, reges, regibus, reges. Feminine virtus, virtutus, you can see the rest of it there. So those are all third declension masculine. Feminine neuter is almost the same, but it has just a little bit different endings. Blank, is, e, blank, because we have that neuter rule, whatever's in the nominative must be in the accusative. So because nominative is blank, we have accusative blank here. So blank, is, e, blank, and vocative is the same as the nominative, so it's also blank. And then, of course, the neuter plural, nominative and accusative shifts to, and vocative shifts to an A. So ibis, a. And you can see the word corpus, corporis declined out there for you. So that's your third declension. Again, if you need to, go back and practice those. All right. Let's see here. And this is, of course, the chart without the vocative because, again, generally we don't show the vocative. Now, there's a little bit different word or declension out there. It's third declension I stem. There's a few nouns out there that are I stem, and they are almost identical to regular third declension nouns. You can see third declension endings there. In the I stem, you shift in the genitive plural to an eum instead of an and you can see this. Again, in the third declension neuter, you've got the A's, and in the I stem, it becomes an IA. Those are your basic shifts there. All right. So if you had any problem, eum for the genitive plural. And then, of course, you had the irregular I stem word wis. Oops, I'm skipping something here. The only additional change is the ablative singular, which is also an I. And there's the irregular wis. You just need to memorize that form. It's pretty complex. Don't confuse that word with weary, which means man. All right. So this was a lesson you learned last year. If you have any problems with it, go back and work on it. All right. Now, third declension I stem. There's a couple of different stems. There are some that are parasibillic, which means that the nominative case, well, let me say parasibillic means that they have equal syllables in the nominative and genitive case singular. So in this case, kiwis, they both are two syllables. But if they are parasibillic and it's either masculine or feminine gender, and if the nominative case ends in an is or es, like you have here, kiwis, then it is a third declension I stem noun. If it doesn't meet all three of these characteristics, then it's not an I stem, and it means you would decline it as a regular third declension noun. Nubis is another example, but it's feminine. There are some that are a two consonant base, and here are the rules for that. Has to be masculine or feminine, but mostly feminine. The nominative has to end in an S or an X, so herbs ends in an S, so it fits. Base has to end in two consonants, so if you take off the genitive endings in herbis, then your stem is herb, and that's two consonants. That means it fits the category here. And then it has to be monosyllabic, I can't say that word, monosyllabic in the nominative case singular. Most often it's nominative, or it's most often not monosyllabic. So herbs is just got one syllable. So it fits all those characteristics. So if that's the case, then you know this is a third declension I stem. And again, you use the third declension I stem endings. And then the last category for third declension I stem was a neuter. And two rules. It has to be neuter, and the nominative singular has to end in an E, an AL, or an AR, like you see mare. And because mare is neuter and it ends in an E, it is third declension I stem, so you must use the I stem endings. All right. And then again, here's the the third declension I stem irregular wis that you just need to memorize that form. I've put it here in comparison to the second declension word man. That you can see, especially in the plural, they look a lot alike. Has a VIR for both of these, and you got to be real careful. But if it has second declension endings like e, orum, isosis, it's second declension and it means man. If it's got third declension endings like s, eum, ibis, s, ibis, then it's a third declension I stem word, and it means force in the singular and plural in the strength. Means force in the singular and strength in the plural. Let me say that right. All right, so again, if you want to take a break, take a break. If not, we're going to move on to ablative case. We're almost done here. So you learned several things about ablative case last year. You learned that the ablative case can be used for, well, back up here, definition. It's called the adverbial case because it's used to modify or limit the action of a verb. And last year, we learned three specific uses: ablative of means, ablative of accompaniment, and ablative of manner. So just real quickly looking at these different forms, ablative of instrument, the ablative of means or instrument is the ablative of means is a noun or pronoun that answers the question by what means or instrument was the action being carried out. And how do you recognize it? Well, you have a noun in the ablative case that has no preposition in front of it. There's no preposition. And when you translate it, you say by means of or with blank, whatever that noun is. So here's an example of it. Literas stilo scripsit. Stilo is in the ablative, and it's an ablative of means. Notice that it has no preposition in front of it, and you translate it scripsit. He wrote the letter literas with a pen. He wrote the letter with a pen. So it answers the question, by what means did he write the pen? And so you translate it with the pen. Then there's the ablative of accompaniment. So the definition is, oops, it skipped ahead. Sorry about that. Let me get it to go back. Go back. There we go. Ablative of accompaniment is a noun or pronoun that answers the question, with whom is the action of the verb being carried out? And you recognize this because it has a noun or pronoun in the ablative case with the preposition cum, and you translate it with blank, whatever that noun is. So here's the example. Cum amicis venerunt. Cum amici. So amicis is your ablative accompaniment. Notice that it has an ablative with the preposition cum, and you translate it venerunt, they came, cum amicis, with friends. So notice that it answers the question, with whom were they coming? And you translate it with friends. And lastly here we have the ablative of manner. The ablative of manner is a noun or pronoun that answers the question, how or in what manner is the action of the verb being carried out? And you recognize this one because it has a noun or pronoun in the ablative case with the preposition cum, and it means with blank, whatever the noun is in the ablative case. So let's look at an example here. Cum celeritate venerunt. Celeritate is the ablative. So it is ablative with the preposition cum celeritate. They came venerunt. They came cum celeritate, with speed. It's answering the question, in what manner were they coming? And so you translate it with speed. So the big thing here is to recognize what type of ablative it is. If it's an ablative of means, it's telling you how something got done. And if it's like he wrote with a pen, if it's telling you who you did it with, or the action of the verb was done, then it's accompaniment. I walked with him to the store. And if it's telling you the manner in which it's done, then it's an ablative manner. He came with speed. So those are the three ablatives we learned this last year. And then here's several other things that we're going to review during the course of this next several weeks in class. We won't take the time in this video to do it, but we learned other things last year like personal pronouns, demonstrative pronouns, intensive and reflexive pronouns, reflexive possessive adjectives, and special IUS adjectives. All of this you learned in addition to some history about Rome, the Roman Empire, some maps, some geography, etc. We'll be picking that all up this year. I'm so glad you're joining me this year for Latin 2. I'm excited about our time together.